On a crisp Tuesday morning in November, in a quiet district of Vienna known for its antique bookshops and unassuming cafes, a man of indeterminate middle age paid for an espresso and a copy of Die Presse. He was meticulously unremarkable, dressed in a charcoal overcoat that was neither new nor worn, with shoes that suggested comfortable practicality over any form of statement. To the handful of other patrons, he was just another local starting his day. He was, however, the sole focus of a multi-million-dollar surveillance operation being coordinated by a team 3 kilometers away in a rented apartment that bristled with encrypted receivers and data processing servers. The man, known only by the designation Al-Mizan, or the Balance, was a ghost, a critical node in the global architecture of terror financing, and for the past 18 months, the Transnational Threat Directorate had failed utterly to attach a name, a nationality, or a single verifiable biometric to his file. The operative sipping a black coffee at a table across the street, a woman whose legend identified her as a freelance ceramics restorer named Anya, knew that the newspaper in Al-Mizan's hand was not for reading. It was a signal, and the true purpose of her vigil was to document the recipient. The strategic problem facing the directorate was not one of firepower or political will, but of invisibility. Al-Mizan represented a new paradigm in illicit financial transfers, a hybrid entity who moved vast sums of money with the untraceability of an ancient Hawala broker and the speed of a decentralized blockchain. Directorate analysts had first detected his signature, not as a person, but as a statistical anomaly in global financial flows, a recurring pattern of transactions that defied conventional explanation. Funds would originate from a dozen disparate sources: charitable fronts in Western Europe, shell corporations in the Caribbean, ransoms from maritime piracy off the Horn of Africa, and converge into a complex series of layered cryptocurrency wallets. From there, the digital currency would be tumbled, pass through thousands of automated microtransactions to obscure its origin, before being reconstituted and cashed out through a network of complicit exchanges in jurisdictions with lax oversight. The final stage was the most opaque. The physical cash was distributed to operational cells through a system of dead drops and hand-to-hand transfers that left no electronic trace. Conventional methods of financial intelligence, which relied on tracking SWIFT codes and bank transfers, were useless. Attempts to penetrate his digital infrastructure had been met with sophisticated cryptographic defenses that suggested a mind as well-versed in information security as it was in finance. The directorate had intercepted chatter about Al-Mizan for years, always in hushed, reverential tones, as if speaking of a force of nature. He was the logistical linchpin for at least 3 major extremist organizations, the silent partner who ensured that weapons were procured, safe houses were rented, and operatives were paid, all without creating a single data point that could be used against him in a court of law or targeted by a drone strike. The escalation to an extraordinary operation became unavoidable after the Brussels train station bombing, an attack the directorate later confirmed had been funded by a specific tranche of Monero cryptocurrency that bore the unmistakable signature of Al-Mizan's tumbling protocol. The intelligence had been there, but it was historical, a ghost in the machine. They could see where the money had been, but never where it was going. The failure was not one of collection, but of prediction, and the directorate's leadership concluded that the only way to dismantle the network was to find its center, to attach a physical identity to the digital phantom and map his network in real time, a task that conventional surveillance had proven incapable of achieving. The target profile for Al-Mizan was, for a long time, more a collection of deductions than a biographical sketch. He was believed to be in his late 40s or early 50s, educated in the West, likely with a postgraduate degree in economics or computer science. This was inferred from the sheer sophistication of his methods. He combined classical economic theory with cutting-edge cryptography, exploiting the seams between old-world financial systems and the nascent digital economy. His operational security was legendary. He never used the same communication method twice for critical instructions, rotating between encrypted messaging apps, single-use satellite phones, and even messages encoded within the metadata of images posted to obscure online forums. He never maintained a fixed residence, moving between a series of leased apartments and high-end hotels in major European and Middle Eastern cities, never staying in one place for more than a few weeks. He had no discernible vices, and no close relationships. He was a monk, dedicated to his cause. The psychological profile assembled by the Directorate's Behavioral Analysis Unit painted a picture of a man driven not by greed or a lust for power, but by profound ideological conviction. He saw himself as a revolutionary, a leveler of the scales, hence the moniker Al-Mizan. He believed he was waging a righteous economic war against a corrupt global order, and his role was to provide the material means for that war. This ideological purity made him incredibly dangerous. He was not susceptible to bribery, blackmail, or coercion. His paranoia was a functional asset, a finely tuned instrument of survival. Directorate surveillance teams had attempted to place him under physical observation on 3 separate occasions in Istanbul, Dubai, and Berlin. Each time, he had vanished within 48 hours. He employed textbook counter-surveillance techniques, reversing his direction of travel, entering and immediately exiting public buildings, using reflective surfaces to check for tails, but he also displayed an almost preternatural sense of being watched, an instinct that went beyond training. The challenge was not simply to find him, but to observe him without him knowing he was being observed, a task that grew exponentially more difficult with a target whose primary defense was a state of constant, heightened awareness. He was a man who lived his entire life as if he were under surveillance, making him the most difficult of all subjects to place under actual surveillance. The core of his network's resilience was its decentralization, but the Directorate's analysis concluded that Al-Mizan himself was the single point of failure. While his system could survive the loss of individual cells or money brokers, it could not survive the loss of the architect who understood the entire blueprint. Faced with the repeated failures of conventional tracking and the target's almost supernatural ability to detect surveillance, the Directorate's Special Operations Division proposed a radical and high-risk solution, codenamed Operation Silent Ledger. The plan was not to capture or eliminate Al-Mizan, as the intelligence value of his living network was deemed far greater than the symbolic victory of his death or imprisonment. The goal was to insert a single, deep-cover operative whose sole purpose was to become his shadow, to follow him across borders, to document his every meeting, his every dead drop, and his every digital communication, for as long as it took to map the entirety of his global network. This was not a standard surveillance operation. It was to be a long-duration human intelligence mission, more akin to an anthropological study than a police stakeout. The core of the proposal was the acceptance that Al-Mizan could not be tailed by a traditional team. He was too adept at spotting them. Therefore, the chase would be conducted by a single operative, the cartographer, who would operate with a minimal remote support footprint and would never get close enough to risk a direct confrontation. The operative's role was to be a ghost hunting a ghost. The obstacles were immense. Linguistically, the operative needed fluency in English, German, Arabic, and Farsi, the languages most frequently detected in Al-Mizan's peripheral communications. Technologically, the mission required the development of bespoke surveillance tools that were entirely passive and undetectable. The risk of exposure was catastrophic. An operative captured by Al-Mizan's network would not be handed over to any state authority but would simply disappear, their intelligence value extracted through brutal means. The legal and diplomatic implications were also a minefield. The operation would, by necessity, violate the sovereignty of numerous countries, many of them allies. The entire mission would have to be completely deniable, with no official record or government sanction. The Directorate's leadership understood that if the operation failed and the cartographer was exposed, they would be utterly disavowed. The solution was audacious, precisely because it embraced the target's own principles. It was decentralized, patient, and relied on human intelligence augmented by technology, rather than the other way around. It was a commitment to play the long game, to invest months, or even years, in a single asset on the chance that they could peel back the layers of Al-Mizan's world one by one. The preparation phase of Operation Silent Ledger was a masterpiece of clandestine tradecraft, a multifaceted effort that took nearly a year to complete and consumed a budget that was never officially recorded. The technological preparations were headed by the Directorate's Q-branch equivalent, the Technical Services Division. Their primary task was to equip the future operative with tools that could gather intelligence from a distance without emitting any detectable signals. They developed a series of long-range passive listening devices, including a laser microphone capable of capturing vibrations on a window pane from over 500 meters away and translating them back into audible conversation. For digital surveillance, they engineered a firmware exploit that could be delivered via a specially crafted Wi-Fi pineapple, a device disguised as a generic travel router. If the operative could get the device within a certain proximity of Almazan for just a few minutes, for instance, in an adjacent hotel room or a coffee shop, it would broadcast a seemingly legitimate network signal that his devices might automatically connect to, allowing the exploit to be delivered silently. This exploit would not exfiltrate data directly, which would create suspicious network traffic. Instead, it was designed to subtly degrade the entropy of the encryption keys on his devices, creating minute, statistically insignificant vulnerabilities in his encrypted communications that could then be exploited by the Directorate's supercomputing arrays back at headquarters. The most intricate piece of technology was a set of custom-made contact lenses. The right lens contained a high-resolution camera with a 7-degree field of view, activated by a sequence of 3 rapid blinks. The left lens contained a microdisplay linked to a subcutaneous receiver implanted behind the operative's ear, allowing the support team to project text-based instructions or facial recognition data directly into their field of vision. Every piece of equipment was designed with the principle of passive collection in mind. Nothing would transmit, everything would simply record for later, clandestine exfiltration by the operative. The tactical details were just as meticulous. The support team created a complex digital infrastructure, including a network of virtual private servers and anonymous shell companies, to manage the logistics of the operation. This infrastructure was used to book travel, lease apartments, and transfer funds for the operative in a way that was completely detached from any government entity, appearing as the random, chaotic noise of the global economy. This digital scaffolding was the invisible architecture that would allow the cartographer to move across the globe in Almazan's wake without raising flags in any national monitoring system. The sheer level of detail was staggering, extending to the creation of falsified credit histories and social media profiles for the operatives' cover identities, aged over months to appear authentic to any cursory background check. The selection of the operative for such a mission was the most critical variable. The role required a unique psychological makeup, the patience of a scholar, the observational skills of a naturalist, and the emotional resilience of a deep cover agent. The Directorate's recruitment division found their candidate not in the ranks of their paramilitary operators, but in their own forensic accounting department. She was a woman in her late 30s who had been with the Directorate for a decade, a brilliant but unassuming analyst who had a rare talent for seeing patterns in complex data sets. Her motivation was deeply personal. Her husband, a journalist, had been killed in a terrorist attack in Mumbai several years prior, an attack that later analysis revealed had been financed through a network she herself had been investigating, but had not yet fully understood. This grief had not broken her. It had forged her into an instrument of focused, cold resolve. She saw the abstract numbers on her screen as a direct link to human suffering, and she was driven by a quiet, burning need to prevent it. Her psychological profile showed an exceptionally high capacity for compartmentalization and a low need for social interaction, making her an ideal candidate for the profound isolation the mission demanded. Her training was brutal and comprehensive. For 6 months, she was immersed in an intensive program. She spent weeks in language labs, refining her German and Arabic until she could pass as a native speaker in casual conversation. She was trained by former Mossad instructors in the art of counter-surveillance, learning not just how to spot a tail, but how to clean herself by moving through a city in a way that would reveal any observation. She underwent weeks of psychological conditioning, including simulated interrogations and extended periods of sensory deprivation, designed to stress test her resilience and fortify her mind against the pressures of long-term solitude and the constant, low-grade fear of discovery. She was trained to live a lie so completely that it became her reality. The physical component of her training was not about combat, but about endurance and unobtrusiveness. She learned to modulate her breathing, to control her heart rate under stress, to sit perfectly still for hours on a park bench, and to walk with a gait that was utterly forgettable. She became a gray woman, designed to blend into the background of any city, in any country. She was no longer an analyst. She was being systematically deconstructed and rebuilt into the cartographer. The final piece of the preparatory puzzle was the construction of her cover identity, her legend. For an operation of this duration and complexity, a single legend was insufficient. The Directorate's Tradecraft unit built her a primary identity and 2 backup legends, each with its own meticulously crafted backstory, documentation, and digital footprint. Her primary legend was that of Anja Schmidt, a freelance ceramics restorer. This was a stroke of genius from the behavioral unit. The profession provided a plausible reason for her to travel to cities with rich cultural histories. Vienna, Florence, Istanbul, cities that were also likely haunts for a man like Al-Mizan. It justified her carrying unusual tools and materials, some of which could be modified to conceal surveillance equipment. It also provided a cover for her long hours of patient, meticulous work. An observer watching her apartment would simply see a woman quietly focused on a piece of pottery, not an intelligence operative analyzing surveillance data. Her legend was supported by a wealth of physical and digital artifacts. The Directorate established a small but legitimate-looking website showcasing her portfolio of restored ceramics. They created social media profiles for her on platforms frequented by artists and restorers, which were populated over months with innocuous posts and interactions. They backstopped her legend with a leased studio address in Munich, a German bank account with a history of regular, small transactions, and even a subscription to an obscure art history journal. To complete the picture, her handler instructed her to acquire a cat once she was settled in her first long-term location. A pet, he explained, was a powerful anchor for a cover identity. It established a routine, suggested stability, and was a detail so mundane and personal that it disarmed suspicion. Her backup legends were equally detailed. One was a Canadian academic researcher studying migratory bird patterns, providing a cover for travel to more remote areas and the use of binoculars and long-range camera lenses. The other was a wealth manager for a boutique Swiss firm, a legend to be used only in an emergency, allowing her to blend into the high-finance environments Al-Mizan sometimes frequented. Each identity came with a complete set of documentation passports, driver's licenses, university degrees, all created by the Directorate's forgers with a level of quality that would withstand anything short of a direct query to the issuing national database. The psychological process of inhabiting these legends was the final stage of her training. She spent weeks living as Anja, thinking as Anja, building a mental world so complete that her reactions would be automatic. She was not just playing a part, she was becoming someone else. A necessary transformation for a mission where a single moment of hesitation or an out-of-character response could mean the difference between success and a silent, unacknowledged death. The operation went live on a gray September day. The cartographer, now fully inhabiting the persona of Anja Schmidt, landed at Vienna International Airport with 2 suitcases and a carry-on bag containing the tools of her ostensible trade. Her insertion was deliberately mundane. She took a taxi to a pre-leased apartment in the Josefstadt district, a neighborhood chosen for its quiet, residential character and its proximity to several areas. Directorate analysts had identified as potential meeting spots for Al-Mizan based on past patterns. For the first 3 weeks, she did nothing but establish her cover. She bought groceries at the local market, she set up her small kiln, she purchased a ginger tabby cat from a local shelter, and she was seen sketching in cafes. She was building a pattern of life, a baseline of normalcy against which any deviation would stand out. The support team, operating from a secure facility thousands of miles away, monitored her through her own devices, but she was functionally alone. Her only communication with her handler was through a one-way burst transmission disguised as a software update to her laptop, which she received once every 72 hours. The waiting was a form of psychological warfare. Every day was a test of her discipline, a battle against the paranoia that was both a necessary tool and a potential poison. Then, on the 24th day, the signal came. A Directorate Signals Intelligence Unit flagged a brief, heavily encrypted satellite phone transmission originating from a location 300 kilometers southeast of Vienna. The transmission was too short to decrypt, but its metadata signature matched one used by Al-Mizan's network 6 months earlier. It was not a confirmation, but it was a possibility. The cartographer was instructed to begin a passive search pattern. For the next week, she moved through the city, visiting museums, libraries, and public squares that fit the profile of Almazan's preferred neutral meeting grounds. She never looked for a person. She looked for anomalies, for the man who did not fit, the man who was watching his own back. The build-up to the first contact was a slow, agonizing burn. She sat for hours in cafes, her specialized contact lens camera dormant, her senses on high alert. She was a human sensor array, processing thousands of data points the way a man held his newspaper, the angle at which another sat to observe all exits, the subtle pause of someone checking for a reflection in a shop window. It was on the 8th day of her search that she saw him, the man from the file, the statistical ghost made flesh, buying an espresso and a copy of D-Press. The execution of the surveillance was a masterclass in patience. The cartographer never attempted to follow Almazan directly from the cafe. That would have been amateurish and would have been detected immediately. Instead, she recorded his face using her contact lens camera, a sequence of 3 rapid blinks transmitting the image to her support team. The team used the image to run a real-time facial recognition search against a massive, constantly updated database of CCTV footage scraped from public and private cameras across Vienna. Within minutes, they had a hit. A camera on a U-Bahn platform had captured him 2 days prior. By cross-referencing his movements, the team began to build a predictive model of his daily routine. He was not staying in a hotel, but in a private residence. His movements were methodical and seemingly random, designed to defeat casual observation. The cartographer's role was not to follow, but to be in the right place at the right time. Her support team would analyze the data, predict a likely location for the next day, a park, a library, a specific street corner, and she would simply go there, embedding herself in the environment hours in advance. She would be a painter in the park, a student in the library, a tourist admiring a building. She was part of the scenery, present but invisible. For weeks, this was the rhythm of the operation. She would observe, record, and disengage. She documented him meeting with a man in a trench coat on the Reichsbrücke, the two of them walking side by side without exchanging a word, only to have the second man drop a small, metallic object into a trash receptacle moments after they parted. She recorded the license plate of a diplomatic vehicle that lingered near a cafe where Almazan sat for precisely 7 minutes. Each observation was a single pixel, meaningless on its own, but when added to the mosaic being assembled by the analysts back at headquarters, it began to form a picture. The psychological strain was immense. She lived in a state of perpetual, controlled hypervigilance. The ginger cat, named Kepler, became her only anchor to a semblance of normal life, its simple, animal presence a bulwark against the crushing isolation. The tense waiting periods were the most difficult, hours and sometimes days with no sightings, where the temptation to take a more active role was a constant battle against the discipline of the mission's core principle, passive collection. Her handler's messages, projected as faint blue text in the corner of her eye by the contact lens, were her only human contact, brief, clinical instructions that reinforced the mission parameters and reminded her that she was a component in a much larger machine. The climax of Operation Silent Ledger was not a shootout or a dramatic capture. It was a moment of quiet, calculated audacity in the hushed confines of the Austrian National Library. For 2 months, the cartographer had shadowed Almazan across 3 countries from Vienna to Prague, then to Zurich. The network map was growing, with dozens of nodes identified facilitators, couriers, and shell corporations. But the core of his communication system remained a black box. The directorate knew he used a specific model of hardened laptop, a device he never let out of his sight. The firmware exploit developed by the technical division remained her primary objective, the key that could unlock his entire digital kingdom. The opportunity came on a snowy afternoon in Zurich. Almazan had settled into a routine of spending several hours a day in a secluded carrel at the Zentralbibliothek, a university library. The cartographer, under her academic researcher legend, secured a carrel on the floor directly above his. For 3 days, she did nothing but observe. She used a fiber-optic borescope, no thicker than a human hair, which she threaded through a pre-existing ventilation shaft, to watch him. He was disciplined, always positioning his chair so he could see the entrance, his laptop bag always looped around his leg. The plan for deploying the Wi-Fi pineapple was high risk. The device, disguised as a generic phone charger, had a limited effective range of less than 10 meters. She could not simply leave it in a nearby outlet. On the fourth day, the moment presented itself. A fire alarm, triggered by a support team agent who had pulled a manual call point in a distant wing of the library, blared through the building. As per protocol, patrons began to evacuate. The cartographer watched through the borescope as Al-Mizan quickly packed his bag. Crucially, in his haste, he unplugged his laptop but left his personal power adapter plugged into the wall. As he disappeared into the stream of evacuating students, she moved. She had a window of perhaps 90 seconds. She descended the stairs, walked calmly to his carrel, unplugged his adapter, and plugged her own modified device into the socket. She then continued out of the building. The entire action took less than 7 seconds. She did not look back. For the next hour, as firefighters cleared the building, the small, innocuous-looking charger broadcast its signal. Her support team confirmed it. Al-Mizan's laptop, which he had opened in a nearby cafe to wait out the alarm, had automatically connected to the malicious network for a period of 4 minutes and 12 seconds. The exploit was delivered. The immediate aftermath of the library incident was a period of extreme tension. The cartographer had to assume that Al-Mizan, a man whose paranoia was his greatest defense, might eventually discover the breach. Her instructions were to maintain her cover and continue passive observation, but from a greater distance. The mission had shifted from intelligence gathering to damage assessment and exploitation. The data began to flow almost immediately. The exploit had worked perfectly. It did not steal information directly, but subtly weakened the encryption on the data packets leaving his machine. The Directorate's decryption arrays, which had previously been faced with an unbreakable wall of code, now had a microscopic flaw to exploit. Within 72 hours, they had their first breakthrough, a decrypted email fragment containing a series of bank account numbers in a Lebanese bank known for its ties to Hezbollah. A week later, they decrypted a full set of instructions for a hawala broker in Pakistan, detailing a payment schedule for an operational cell in Afghanistan. The intelligence windfall was staggering. Over the next 3 months, as the cartographer continued her silent watch from the periphery, the Directorate's analysts used the decrypted communications to piece together Al-Mizan's entire global enterprise. They mapped his network of financiers, identified his key lieutenants, tracked his money flows from source to destination, and, most importantly, gained predictive insight into future operations. Based on the intelligence from Operation Silent Ledger, coordinated actions by Allied intelligence services led to the quiet arrest of 17 facilitators in 6 different countries, the seizure of over $30 million in assets, and the preemption of at least 2 planned attacks in Europe. Al-Mizan was never aware of the true source of his network's sudden collapse. He attributed the losses to bad luck, betrayal, and the increased pressure from conventional financial surveillance. He became more erratic, his movements more frantic. The cartographer's final act was to observe him in Istanbul, a diminished figure, his network in ruins, meeting with a low-level courier in a desperate attempt to rebuild. Her mission was complete. Her extraction was as quiet as her insertion. One day, the ceramic restorer named Anya Schmidt packed her bags, left a note for the landlord about the cat, and took a taxi to the airport. She and her various other identities ceased to exist. The consequences of Operation Silent Ledger were profound, both strategically and personally. For the Transnational Threat Directorate, it was a landmark success, a validation of a new, patient, and human-centric approach to intelligence in the digital age. The complete map of Al-Mizan's network provided actionable intelligence for years, allowing the Directorate to move from a reactive to a proactive posture against multiple extremist threats. The political and diplomatic fallout was carefully managed. The arrests were made by local authorities based on sanitized intelligence tips, with no trace leading back to the Directorate or the operation. The strategic value was undeniable. However, the true cost was borne by the operative. The woman who had been the cartographer returned to a world she no longer fully inhabited. The psychological conditioning and the long months of isolation had fundamentally altered her. She was awarded the Directorate's highest clandestine service medal in a ceremony attended by only her handler and the director, a medal she could never wear, for an operation that officially never happened. She was offered a senior analytical position, a desk job far from the dangers of the field, but she found it impossible to reconnect with the abstract world of data on a screen. The line between her true self and the legends she had lived had been irrevocably blurred. The grief that had once been a motivating fire had cooled into a permanent, detached emptiness. She had succeeded in her mission, avenging her husband's death in the most comprehensive way imaginable, but she had lost herself in the process. The operation raised deep and unsettling questions within the directorate about the ethical boundaries of such missions. To defeat a man who operated like a ghost, they had to create their own. They had deployed a human being as a long-duration, passive sensor, an act of profound psychological violence, justified by the prevention of greater physical violence. The success of Silent Ledger became a template for future operations, but it also served as a dark, cautionary tale about the human cost of fighting monsters in the shadows. The ghost financier, Al-Mizan, eventually disappeared, likely eliminated by his own people for his failures, but the systems he created endured, a testament to the persistent and evolving nature of the threat. The cartographer left the directorate a year later, quietly resigning and vanishing into a new life of her own making, forever a stranger in a world she had fought so hard to protect. When does the pursuit of a threat justify the complete erosion of an operative's own identity? In a world of invisible enemies, is it morally defensible to sacrifice one person's humanity to save many others? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story compelling, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel.